I don't care what the world think about the crisis in Eastern DRC. All I care about is what the current government is actually doing about it. But sadly, the central government has exposed its weaknesses to the world through an underwhelming strategic approach that's been a complete failure. But the core question we are working with today is this: could the bleeding and territorial losses in the East have been prevented? You see, in December of 2024, a meeting between Rwanda's President Kagame and DRC's President Tshisekedi in Angola, hosted by the then African Union peace mediator, President Joao Lorenzo, was cancelled due to Rwanda's delegation's refusal to participate, because Rwanda argued that all parties must be involved for the peace deal to work. But DRC categorically refused to engage AFC M23 rebels, and the Congolese president even called them Rwandan puppets and promised never to negotiate. Now, many accuse Rwanda of backing the rebels, an accusation Kigali denies. But here is the thing: even if a peace deal was signed on that day between both parties, it's unlikely the rebels would have disarmed, considering many among them feel they have nothing left to lose since they've already been sentenced to death by Kinshasa. Now, interestingly, it's the rebels who have never shut the door on negotiations. Meanwhile, the government in Kinshasa refused to talk, even as they lost town after town, starting with Bunagana in June 2022, then Ruchuru, Kinchanga, Masisi, Minova, Sake, and the list goes on. And on January 2025, Goma, and a month later, Bukavu. Then in March, Walikale, the strategic mining town, was seized despite ceasefires call from Rwanda and DRC. You see, in my village they say mosquitoes do not like games where people clap too much. So, not so mysteriously, the rebels voluntarily withdrew from Walikale just in time for global business to resume feeding the world's appetite for minerals. But as of today, the rebels control a region roughly the size of Eswatini, Lesotho, Djibouti, Burundi, and Rwanda combined. It's a territory home to 11 million people. And I'll tell you this: if I was addicted to coffee and the full-time conspiracy theories, I would say the government is complicit for letting this spread like a virus. Anyways, you see, just a year ago, I suggested the government should seriously sit down with the rebels and talk. However, some people oppose the idea, insisting the rebels must be brought to justice. But my question has always been, who will bring them to justice? I mean, they've already been sentenced in absentia in Kinshasa, but who will bring them to justice? Who will go to the east and arrest them and bring them to justice? It's not as if they are hiding. Look, strategically, militarily, and diplomatically, the government failed the people in the East by wasting time they did not have. They first invited the East African forces for help, then pointed fingers at them. Next, they turned to the regional Southern African forces, SADC, who stayed briefly, but then they were called back home. Meanwhile, Burundian forces and some local militia joined the government side alongside overpaid European mercenaries who ran to seek refuge at a UN base in Goma when it came time to draw their weapons and fight. And within days, the UN negotiated their exit back to Europe through Rwanda, leaving behind poorly paid Congolese soldiers to defend the country while overpaid politicians continue to engage in corruption and embezzlement in Kinshasa. There is a serious lack of accountability and seriousness. But remember, this is just one of over 120 armed groups freely roaming and operating in the country. However, in June 2025, DRC signed a peace deal with Rwanda in Washington while simultaneously beginning negotiations with the rebels in Qatar 3 years later after the fall of Bunagana. And the government spokesperson stated that, listen carefully, The peace agreement between DRC and Rwanda cannot fully work unless the Doha process is completed. Listen, until the day we as Africans stop blindly picking side in political games and start demanding nothing but result and accountability from these players, I tell you, nothing will change. This kind of nonsense will not stop. I mean, why wasn't that the consensus in Angola when it was put on the table? Yet, in Doha and Washington, it passed like a hot knife in butter. Maybe the idea of an African solution to an African problem isn't exotic enough for some Africans. I mean, why wasn't the negotiation started since the fall of Bunagana? Because clearly they understood very early that they did not have the firepower to fight the rebels. Look, many lives are being lost over minerals that the majority of the people in the region have never benefited from, unless, of course, if you're close to power. You see, the wealth is extracted, exported, and exploited while the people live in abject poverty as if they don't walk on gold. But in my opinion, Congo's greatest tragedy isn't its mineral wealth, but its unpatriotic, egotistical leadership that turned that blessing into a curse. But sadly, that's often the story across the African continent.
We, ni nini?